Hello, everyone, and welcome. We told you that you're going to be in for a treat today because we have a special guest today. And we're going to be talking to Christina Napoleon on how to find hope after loss. And she's going to be sharing 4 powerful tools for getting your life back after loss. I know several of you are looking forward to this. So, let's not wait any longer. Let's bring her to the stage. Hey, Christina.
Hi, Katherine. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you this morning.
Oh, yes, my pleasure. So, the last couple weeks, I've been letting people know that you were going to be coming. And so we're thankful that you're here and that you're able to speak into people's lives who have dealt with loss. Now, we're talking, Christina's story has a lot of loss in it. She lost her husband, and then she lost her, was it your dad?
My mom first,
Your mom first,
and then my
then your
dad.
dad. But
Yes.
it wasn't until you lost your dad that all these memories came flooding back to you of all this loss that you had suppressed and pushed down.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that today and how you have to really deal with it, and so it doesn't come up more with a vengeance. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and your story so people can get up to speed with why you're here and why you wrote the book, The Positive Widow.
Thank you so much. I come from a world of corporate. So I worked in finance my whole career, which is such a big shift what I'm doing now. I'm a public speaker. I wrote a book on hope and healing after loss. I lead a widows group with thousands of members. And I also just launched my first grief relief group coaching program with my little sisterhood tribe, and it's been amazing. We just finished week 2, and it's just beautiful, and the connections and the hope and growth that they're experiencing. Because what I am teaching is that you're not going to be able to move forward unless you do the grief work. And that's why I wanted to write the book, because when my husband died, as I said, I came from corporate. I had my own mortgage company at that time. I had a staff of 14 employees. And I was used to walking into the office, and my assistant would have a checklist on my desk, and it would have everything that I needed to do for that day before I could leave the office and go home. I knew I had to check everything off. But the night that my husband died, nobody gave me a checklist. Nobody said, here are instructions of what you need to do now that you've become a widow, now that you've become a solo mama. My husband was just 3 weeks shy of his 5-year survival rate, surviving cancer. So I entered widowhood in disbelief. I was one of those caregivers that really thought he was going to survive and beat cancer because he was just 3 weeks shy of the 5-year survival rate. And my daughter was only 6 years old. So I just kept thinking, oh my goodness, God's not going to take my husband away. We have to raise our little girl together. We have all these years left. We were only married at that time 8 years. So we didn't even make it to our 10th year wedding anniversary. And I just was in disbelief and denial. And I was so lost because nobody gave me checklists on what to do now that my husband has passed away. So I suppressed my feelings. I suppressed my grief. I became a robot for my daughter. Everything I did centered around my 6-year-old daughter and how do I take care of her now? And it wasn't until my mom died unexpectedly a few years later. And boy, I needed my husband to get through that part. He was my rock. So not to have him in my life when I had to make the decision to take her off life support was very, very hard. And then I took my dad in, and he was very sick, and I was his caregiver for almost 2 years. And then when he died, all of those losses, they all came up so unexpectedly. And that's what happens with grief. You think you're doing good. You're walking and you're, just moving on. That's what everybody wants you to believe. You're moving on, but you're never going to move on with grief. What you're going to do is do the grief work and learn how to move forward with baby steps. But I didn't know that, and I shut all my emotions down. So when my dad died and I came home after dropping my daughter off to school, the house was so quiet. And I just went into a dark, dark place. I really lost myself because all of those emotions that I was suppressing came up so unexpectedly.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about suppressing your emotions, when anybody, no matter what they're dealing with, if they've got a lot of unsuppressed emotions, it's like I always use the beach ball analogy. When you push a beach ball under the water, the further you push it down under the water, eventually the higher up it's going to spring with more velocity. And when we talk about grief, those of you who are watching, maybe you haven't dealt with necessarily a death of somebody close to you, but you can have grief over loss of a career, loss of an identity, loss of, like, maybe you got in an accident and you can't walk anymore. And you have grief over the loss of your ability to use your limbs. I had been talking to Christina at one of the masterminds we were attending about how I went through a period of grief and still am at occasionally dealing with grief around, like, the diagnoses that my older son has and the grief of the future that I thought he would have.
Yes.
So parents who, when they have a child and their child is born, they find out they have all these special needs. Parents are like, oh, is my son going to be a doctor or a lawyer, or is he going to, work in the family business with me? And then when you start hearing all the diagnoses, there's a depression that can happen, and the loss of, like, wow, he's not going to, they told me he was never going to walk. He was never going to talk. So all the loss, it hits you almost like the death of a person, even though they're still here. So those of you who are listening that are maybe thinking, well, this doesn't relate to me, I haven't lost anyone, I want you to just pay attention, because she's got a lot to say on grief. And even if you're not going through grief, about finding hope, even just in the disappointments in life when things don't work out the way you want them to. So, Christina, I want you to share a little bit about how when you were a child, you lost your brother, but was never able to talk about it.
Oh.
Okay, you cry. It's okay.
Oh my goodness. I didn't know you were going to bring that one up, Katherine. I haven't really publicly spoken about that. I suppressed that one because when my brother died, I was only 9 years old. And my mother, who has passed away since now, she actually locked herself in her bedroom for a good year. And we were not allowed to talk about it. Like, everything in our house just changed. And I was born in Chicago in the Midwest. And I don't know if it was just my culture. My parents were both immigrants. My mom came from Germany, my dad from Lithuania. And we lived in Chicago. I didn't even speak English until I was 5 years old because of all the ethnic communities in Chicago. So we were raised to believe that showing emotions was a sign of weakness. Your strength was if you dove into work and, academics and work and things like that. But showing emotions was such a sign of weakness. And since then, I've now learned, because I dove into self-help and into becoming a grief educator and a grief coach. It wasn't until I was going through grief education that I realized we live in an uneducated grief society, and that all those years of never talking about my brother, it came up during my grief education training, and our instructor had me in the hot seat. I know you know what the hot seat is. And he had us do an inventory list of our losses and our top 10 losses. And he wasn't happy with the top 10 losses that I gave him on the hot seat. And he's like, no, something happened in your childhood. And I'm like,
Wow.
No, I had a really good childhood. No, my mom was loving. We colored. I had a good childhood, and I kept thinking about. I'm like, I had a good childhood, and he's like, no, something happened in your childhood, and out of nowhere, Katherine, I just burst into tears, like the
Wow.
hot, ugly mess, hiccuping, sobbing, crying. It was, and I realized, oh my gosh, my brother died when I was 9 years old, and we were never allowed to talk about it. So yeah, that came up after all my other losses because I didn't dive into the grief education and self-help until after my dad passed away.
Mhm.
So yeah, I didn't know you were going to ask me that, Katherine. I did it without crying.
That means you're making progress, right?
Yes,
You're you're
absolutely.
you're moving forward.
Baby
And
steps forward.
but during that time, even with the great childhood that you did have, there was that missing piece, and not being able to process or talk about it. That's why the self-help work that we do and that we delve into and that I recommend everybody do, one of the best things you could ever do for your life is really getting to know yourself, really
Mhm.
getting to know what makes you tick, what you like, what you dislike, because we don't realize that most of us are going through life not living up to our full potential. We're not becoming as big or expansive or doing the things that God maybe put us on earth to do because we have these things blocking us. And
Right,
we may not even understand where they're coming from. So even though maybe you had forgotten about that temporarily, it was always lodged in your subconscious, and it when you operated in your daily life, you make decisions out of things that happen in your childhood.
right.
So it could be as simple as you're a little girl who loves to sing and you sing all the time, and then your teacher or your auntie or somebody says, "You have a terrible voice. You need to just be quiet. No one wants to hear you sing."
Yeah.
And you block that up
Mhm.
inside you. So thank you for, just being willing to talk about, a childhood trauma that happened. And we know, like you said, the grief work, it's a continuous process. Just because you wrote a book on it, on grief, and you're leading a group on it. Yes, the Positive Widow. And you guys, even if you're not a widow, she has an amazing chapter on grief and understanding grief and what it is, and work in there steps on how to get you back to hope. So those of you who are on today that may need some hope in your life, and maybe you haven't experienced loss in this kind of way, still listen up, because I think the tools that she's going to give today are going to help you out of whether you made a bad situation with taking a job you shouldn't have taken, moving to a area maybe you didn't want to, shouldn't have moved to, or whatever it is. There is hope even after loss, and any kind of loss that we're talking about. So, thank you everyone for being on here today. I see a lot of you leaving comments, a lot of people giving condolences for
Oh,
Christina.
well,
Um,
I can't see the comments, so thank you for letting me know.
yes, yes, they're saying that you're brave, and yeah,
Mm,
Angela, thank you so
thank you.
much for the super sticker. All right, so why what do you think is, why don't you give us, from your chapter in the Positive Widow, why don't you give us an overview in your estimation of what grief is?
So in my book, I'm so glad you hit on this, that it doesn't have to be about physical losses. It could be about, just like you mentioned, your dreams, your hopes, everything was shattered for whatever reason applies to your loss.
Mhm.
I've been so surprised how many men have actually reached out to me that were recommended to read my book. One of them was an attorney who's going through a divorce, and he contacted me and he sent me just the most beautiful message. And he said that my book has really helped him take those first steps into just going through the divorce process without living and continuing to stay in darkness and feeling like he's a failure. For me, the biggest part of grief And of course, my experience is the physical losses. I do have all the other secondary losses, and I talk a lot about that in Understanding Grief chapter. It's not always the event that we're suppressing. It's all these secondary losses that happen. In my situation, it was going to the grocery store and wanting to call him and go, hey, your key lime pie is on sale. Do you want me to buy that? So the finality of never being able to pick up the phone again and calling him ever again, that's a secondary loss. But part of the Understanding Grief chapter is talking about all the myths about grief. And there are hundreds of myths about grief. And there's also all the things that people can and cannot or should not say to those that are grieving. So in my book, if you buy my book, actually, I email you grief guides, and you can give them to your friends and to family members. So they know how to be around you. Because what I didn't understand when I was grieving, I told myself all these stories. And I told myself that nobody was there to help me through it. It wasn't until I was actually going through grief education training and writing my book that I realized that because we live in an uneducated grief society, people just don't know what to say to somebody that's grieving. And Katherine, you may have experienced this with your son. People may feel uncomfortable. People were uncomfortable around me. I lost so many of my friends. And my bereavement counselor was the one who said that because I now lost my husband, now they are concerned that they're going to lose their husband as well. And I'm like, but he had cancer. It's not contagious. They're not going to lose their husband just because my husband passed away. But it made them uncomfortable to be around me because now I no longer was the Christina that they knew and then they loved, because now I was in a world of darkness and sadness. And instead of just saying something to me, even if it was the wrong thing to say, they said nothing at all. And they shut me out of their lives. So I lived on this island of grief all by myself because people were uncomfortable, did not know what to say. A lot of times they didn't want to bring up his name. They were scared if they brought up his name that I would remember that he died. I remember every day. I'm raising our daughter by myself since she's been 6 years old. So I would have loved for them to just show up, hold my hand, let me cry, tell me stories about him, things that maybe I never knew about him that I would have laughed about and loved to hear, and witness my grief. Even if you have nothing to say, just show up and maybe ask me, follow up with me. What is it that I can do to help you? I'm off on Saturday. Can I come do something, yard work, anything for you and Emma while you're going through this difficult period? But unfortunately, so many people don't know what to say, so they don't say anything at all. And what I really want, my mission is to raise awareness that we still live in an uneducated grief society. And I want to raise awareness on widowhood as well, because so many widows were just like me, or they still are the way I used to be. And they live alone in silence and shame because they don't know how to ask for help. And so many people are just uncomfortable being around them because of grief.
So you bring up some really, really important points there. Those of you, maybe there's some of you on here today that haven't dealt with loss of an immediate family member or someone very close to you yet, but you know people who have. And I think you're right. We've been taught so much about, you can't say this, don't say this, don't say, like we just do not want to mess up, and we do not want to make things worse. So it's so much easier to just be quiet, and maybe we are praying for you or something, but we're so afraid of saying the wrong thing to you that we don't say anything to you. So what would be some tips that you could give us, that if we meet someone who's dealt with some loss, some people are on here right now and they're commenting about loss of grandparents, childhood traumas, being raped, loss of health. The comments are coming in of all these losses. How would you suggest that we talk to someone who's been through a loss, and what can we say and what shouldn't we say?
Number one, I would just say meet them where they are. even if you don't agree with where they're at in their grief journey right now, maybe you feel that they should have already moved on. Number one, you don't move on from grief. It is an ongoing process. And what I always say to everybody is I would grieve all day long, every single day, because that meant that I had that love with my husband. So a lot of people feel like she's stuck in her grief. I was judged so much, and I'm sure your listeners, and by the way, I'm so sorry for all of their losses. I can't see the comments, but please let them all know I'm very, very sorry for what they've been through and their losses. But they probably can relate to exactly what I'm about to say of how we think we're doing better and we put on an invisible mask. So a lot of people don't even see the pain that we're carrying. And I bet a lot of them go to work, they put that mask on, and people come up to them and say, "How are you doing?" And I could have been a millionaire by now with all the, "Oh, I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm good." I would say that so that they would be comfortable to come and talk to me. Yet I was the one who just lost my husband, and I'm the one saying, "I'm okay," because I wanted them to be comfortable. Because I knew if I really opened up to them, that they would start to not ask me anymore how I'm doing. They would be uncomfortable and they would retreat and withdraw from me. So what I would like to say about that is, if you know somebody that's grieving, just call them and keep calling them. Keep texting them. Even if they're not responding, they may not be ready yet. They may not be ready to take your call, but keep following up with them. Keep inviting them. Keep inviting them to the holiday gatherings. Keep inviting them to birthday parties. Even if they say no, be respectful of their decision and just understand that today may not be a good day for them. But if you keep trying and reaching out to them, then next time you reach out, they may be ready and they may be like, "You know what? I can get out of bed today. I can come and see you at the party, but I may just pop in for a minute. I may not be able to stay the whole party." And be respectful of that. And also when you call, also know that for me, I remember this, and I had a friend, Lisa, who was so amazing. And she would call me and I couldn't talk because I had this lump in my throat. And she understood that I could not talk. But the comfort I had every time I saw her name pop up on my phone, it let me know that I wasn't alone. And
that somebody cared.
Yes, even though she was on the other end of the phone line and she knew I couldn't talk, before the phone call ended, she had me laughing, she had me smiling, and then I was able to talk. But sometimes it took me a good 10 to 15 minutes. And sometimes she would just talk about silly things that were happening in her day and just, little, "Oh, I just watched this show," and she's just going on and on and on. And I needed that, even though at first I couldn't speak because of that lump in my throat. So just be present for them and accept them how they are. Don't judge them. Don't tell them, compare them to somebody else's grief, because this happened to me. People would tell me all the time, "Oh, so-and-so's cousin just passed away and she's already back to work." We can't compare grief and we can't compare losses. Even as widows in my widow group, I'm always reminding them, we cannot compare each other's grief journey. Everyone grieves differently. Everyone's grief is different. Everyone loved differently. So how can our grief be the same? So we have to accept each other as we are and not push the person to move on, and understand that it is a grief journey. And as we go through the grief work, we will start to find hope and healing again.
Yeah. So you mentioned grief being an ongoing thing that in your estimation never goes away. Where is it that if grief never goes away in your opinion, then how do you find hope? Is it just that the grief lessens, or does the grief turn into like a somber remembering? Is it really that people have to think that they will grieve the rest of their life and feel like crying all the time the rest of their
No.
life? Or is there a turning point where hope kicks in and you're not necessarily grieving, you're remembering and you're hopeful and you love the love, but you have more hope than you do grief? Can you explain that transition or what you meant by we're grieving the rest of our life? Because that seems very heavy.
So the grief will dim, but you grow with your grief. If you're doing the grief work, you will grow with your grief. You're not going to stay in the darkness. And inside of my widow group, the Positive Widow, and inside of my grief relief group coaching program, I teach very simple steps that you can take. And I do a lot of lives and I do Zoom meetings, and I teach them that when you start to feel that little glimmer of hope, that comes up in your belly, don't shut it down. Don't shut it down. Don't feel guilty that, oh my gosh, where's this? Why am I feeling happy? He's not here. I shouldn't feel happiness because he's not here to feel happiness. So there are all these little things that I'm teaching my widows inside of my communities. Embrace those moments because they are so rare in the beginning. The first time I had hope in my stomach, I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was going to have to go back to the ER. And now I'm like, because everything that could go wrong happened after he died. Everything went bad with the house. Everything was falling apart with the car, and everything was falling apart with me physically. So when I felt like this little glimmer, I didn't know what it was in my belly. And when I share it inside of my group, I tell them that it was just like when I was pregnant with Emma. And I'm sure you remember this, Katherine. I didn't know that she was kicking. I just had these little flutters inside of my stomach. And I'm like, what is that? Oh my gosh, I got to go to the ER. And everyone's like, no, that's your baby kicking. So that's what I try to teach them inside of my communities is don't shut those feelings down. Number one, our loved ones want us to be happy. They really do. So the grief, you grow with your grief. The grief doesn't get smaller. You grow with the grief, and you're going to learn how to take, and I have the 4-step hope philosophy. So as you go through the grief work, you'll learn how to move forward with more love and less pain, and you're going to find meaning and purpose again. And as you do that, you're going to move forward honoring him. You're always going to carry him, or whatever your readers or listeners, whoever their loss is or what it is, you're going to carry that love in your heart and be able to honor them. I would be judged and told that, stop living in the past, Christina. I'm like, I'm not living in the past. I'm always going to say his name. I'm always going to talk about him. It's if we shut it down, that's when we stay stuck in that darkness. So that's what I want to encourage everyone is, it's okay to talk about your grief or your experience or what you're going through, Katherine. And it's okay to talk about it with others. And for others who are listening, who are on the other end, please don't judge. Please receive them with kindness, with compassion, with love, and just receive them as they are, because they will grow with their grief and they will find happiness and they will find hope. It's a new normal for them, but with the grief work, you will find hope again.
So, and it also sounds like that, well, that's good news. And it sounds like you want us, those of us who maybe are dealing with someone in our lives who's experienced loss. I've got someone in my life who lost a child. And, you know, you wonder how to talk to them, how to, like, what to say. And so you're saying it's okay to bring up their name and talk about them.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Because otherwise you're pretending like it never happened.
Here's a big part. Say their name. Say their name. Oh my gosh. I have goosebumps right now because I want everyone out there. I want to raise awareness about them. We want to talk about our loved ones. It brings us joy to talk about our loved ones. So those that feel like, oh my gosh, I don't want to bring it up. I don't want to bring their name up. I don't want to remind them of their child or of their spouse, or even if it's a divorce, maybe they don't want to bring up their ex-husband's name. I don't know divorce situation. I'm only in the world of widowhood and a bereaved daughter and a bereaved sister. So, but we want to talk about our loved one. We want to hear stories from you about our loved one that maybe we never heard about. So I encourage everyone that's listening, if you know somebody that's grieving and you have stories, really nice stories to share, or just ask them, you know, oh, what was your favorite memory with them? I promise you that will help you connect with that person on such a deeper level. And they're going to appreciate it so much. And you're going to see smiles start to come. You're going to see tears. You be prepared, because we still have all these emotions bottled up. And of course, we're still sad. But the more we talk about it, the more you release those emotions. You can't heal what you don't feel. So you're basically encouraging them to talk about their loved one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is you're having me remember my acting coach, who was very close to me. He was my mentor, and he passed away. And I had his celebration of life at my house in my backyard, and his brother and sister-in-law flew in from Minnesota, and I had all these people who had done theater with him, who had done plays with him, and he was a coach, an acting coach, and everyone got up and was sharing their fun stories and talking. And I shot it live so his other relatives out of state could see. But the relatives were like, oh my gosh, I never knew this side of him. I never knew how fun and quirky he could be, or how. And they just, his brother and his sister-in-law told me it was the best funeral celebration of life they had ever been to. And I just had people, it wasn't a somber thing. We were coming up telling all the silly stuff. Like, I remember when he made me do this audition upside down, and I'm filming myself, and the silly stuff he made us do. And they were getting so much out of it. So I can see now that you say this, how important that would be.
It is.
And I think somebody's like, why wouldn't you say their name? Well, sometimes we're scared that it might make you upset, or make you cry more, or make it worse. But you giving us the permission is great. And yes, Nicola is asking, can this also apply to breakups or fallouts with someone? Yeah, you can have grief over anything.
Yes.
So
some breakups hurt really bad. It feels like a loss, especially if you can never talk to each other again during a breakup, depending on how the breakup occurred. That what I said earlier about, okay, death is final. I can never pick up the phone or call him. For some breakups, you may have to respect each other's boundaries, and you may not be able to talk to them again. And they probably were your best friend when you were in that relationship. So there comes all those hundreds of secondary losses. You would go to the grocery store together, the first person you texted in the morning, last person you texted at night, all that ends with the breakup. So absolutely, you are grieving that the loss of that relationship.
So when it comes to grief and grieving, what are some challenges that people face, and how would you say that they can overcome them?
So I believe one of the new stages of grief should be anxiety. And Katherine, you and I have talked about anxiety a lot, and I'm working on some of what you were coaching me to do. So if you're looking for a really good coach, Katherine is amazing, by the way, and she has really retrained some of my thinking on on anxiety. But some of the things that do happen after loss, after a great loss, is I grew up in the church life. My father was the treasurer of our church, and I played the piano for our church. I've always gone to church. That's been my whole life. And I thought I was leaning into my faith after my husband passed away. And I know so many, after a significant loss or a disappointment, something didn't go the way you planned it to go for in life. I wanted to grow old with my husband. I wanted to raise my daughter with my husband. I thought I was leaning into my faith, and I didn't realize that I was leaning into my fears, the fear of the unknown. Every time I would get sick at night, even if it was just a sneeze, I would panic and think that, oh my gosh, I'm going to die right now, and I'm going to leave my daughter an orphan. So instead of leaning into my faith, I leaned into fear. And by leaning into fear, I grew further and further away from my faith and turned to a world of darkness. So it was not until I released and gave it all to God, and that he started to call on me. And it was a moment in church where I was sitting there, and this was 3 months after my dad died. So what people can experience when they experience a loss is a world of darkness, a world of thinking that you're having a heart attack and you're going to end up in the ER, because anxiety mirrors a heart attack. And every time I would go to the ER doctors would always tell me it's inside of your head. It's just a simple anxiety attack. And any of you that have experienced anxiety know that there's nothing simple about an anxiety attack. It cripples you. It paralyzes you. You live in darkness. You live in fear. So it's really hard to move out of that darkness when you're so deep in your grief. It's really, and it's hard to find any hope. But I did continue to go to church, and it was months. I mean, we're talking March, 3 months. I was 3 months after my dad died, darkest place in my life, because like I said, now I'm a bereaved wife. I'm a bereaved daughter. I'm a bereaved sister. I knew I was Emma's mom. I knew I had to live for Emma, but who was I now? You lose your identity. You completely lose your identity after loss. And so it was in church, and our pastor was talking about Moses and how Moses felt unqualified for the calling. And I just got goosebumps, and I started to cry, and I was like, oh, no, God. I don't know why you're calling on me. I work in finance. I'm not going to heal widows' hearts. I'm failing right now as a bereaved daughter. I'm failing as a bereaved wife. Why are you calling on me? So I kept ignoring the calling. And the more I ignored the calling, the worse my symptoms got, with anxiety, with panic attacks, with physical ailments, not being able to take the baby steps I needed to take to move forward in my grief. And once I finally understood on the bathroom floor, at the worst moment of my life after being discharged from the ER, I still thought I was going to die that night. And thankfully Emma was at a summer camp, so I was home alone, and I was on that bathroom floor, and I realized I was not praying with a specific request. I was always asking God to help me. God, please help me. Please help me. But I was never specific in asking God to take the fears away, to place his healing hands on my body, place his healing hands on my broken heart, and release the anxieties, release the worries, release the fears. Because when we lose someone so important in our life, so profound is the darkness. It suffocates you. And we don't know how to take that first step forward. So
that's really good stuff. That was a lot. So, but you covered a lot of things. So you're going through the grief. You keep going to church. That's an important part. You want to keep getting that input, that feeding your soul. Get it, just because sometimes it's a struggle to even get out of bed when something like this. But the keep going to church was a huge one. And I remember when my son Timothy was in the neonatal intensive care unit, and it was months. And every time I'd go to church and people would be like, where's Timothy? He's still not out yet? What? Like, when's he going to get out? And I'm like, I don't know when he's ever going to get out of the hospital. But I kept going because I needed the message that was going to be put into me. So you're going, and you're going through these dark moments. You're feeling anxiety come on you. But you, at the same time, you're feeling this calling, like God is tugging on your heart to do something more, to help others who are going through this. There's a woman, evangelist, who used to go around speaking. She spoke at our church many times. Her name was Cheryl Salem. She lost her little 5-year-old daughter when her daughter was, to cancer. And she would talk about, people would come up to her and say awful things to her, like, well, if you had more faith, she would have lived. If you would prayed harder or had more faith, and to hear that, when you've just experienced this huge loss.
That's terrible. That's
How,
horrible.
yeah. So there's that, like, people are afraid to say stuff, and the people that are saying stuff are like saying such horrific things to you that it's just awful. So how do you deal with people who are making these kind of comments? How do you
So,
not, like, yeah,
so what I teach, and I write this a lot in my book, and we talk about this in my grief relief coaching program. I teach that what others think about you is none of your business. It's none of your business. And
yep.
no is a complete sentence. And that was hard for me. That was so hard for me because
Yeah.
I am a people pleaser. And Katherine, you know this story about my book. I first wrote my first draft of the book. I did not mention God in the book at all, at all.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I wanted to please everybody. I wanted to be neutral. I wanted to reach all the widows out there. And I understand
Not
that
offend people. Yeah. I don't
yeah,
want to
even
offend
that
people.
yep, I didn't want to offend anybody because I know a lot of people turn away from God after loss because they're angry that God took their loved one. So I was trying to make everybody happy. And when you try to make everybody happy, you make nobody happy. um, and especially yourself. So
Yeah.
it wasn't until I almost didn't finish my book and I actually shut my laptop down and I went to my daughter's room. And please know that I was writing this book for over a year, pouring my heart and soul into it. It's a little bit of a memoir, but it's more of a self-help book with all the tips and strategies that I share from all of my grief education and grief coaching days. So I went to my daughter's room and I just said, I was crying. And I said, Mommy's not going to be an author. And Emma was like, why, Mommy? And I said, because I can't figure out how to end my book. And she said, but Daddy, and you taught me never to be a quitter. And I said, I know that, sweetheart, but Mommy just can't finish this book. And she looked at me and she said, I know why you can't finish the book, Mommy. And she said, every morning you get to wake up and you get to write about Daddy and your love story and your marriage with Daddy. And you think that if you finish the book and you're going to say goodbye to Daddy all over again. And boy, I started crying. She was crying. The next morning, after I dropped her off at school, I drove to the beach. For those of you that don't know, I live in beautiful Southwest Florida. So I walk to the beach. I walk on the beach a lot in the mornings at sunset. I talk and walk to God, talk with my husband and my loved ones. Because when you're on the beach, the sky is right there. So you feel like heaven is right there. And I feel so connected then. That morning, I was crying so hard and I asked God to please help me finish this book, to use me as his vessel. Let me know, pour the words into my heart that he wants me to say. So I rewrote my book, and in 8 days, by the way, took me over a year to write the first draft. And then in 8 days, I rewrote the whole book. And I didn't even have the understanding.
Let's just pause there for a sec. You're writing for over a year trying not to put God in. Then the moment you have this epiphany and you put God in, it only takes you 8 days to finish your book. I just think we needed to pause on that to say, let's not leave God out of anything, right?
Right. Exactly. I mean, 8 days, I rewrote the book. I didn't have understanding grief. That was not even a chapter before. And then I added the other stories. And that was the one with being on the bathroom floor and how God, I finally realized I have to say a specific prayer to God. God wants us to cast our fears to him. And I was leaning into fears instead of leaning into God and my faith. And I also share how I can't imagine not having God, because how do you have hope if you don't have God in your heart? Those darkest moments when I was laying there crippled and paralyzed in fear, thinking I was having a heart attack, what got me through those moments, Katherine, was the hope that I can pray and that God would accept my prayer and receive it and hear my prayer and help me through those dark moments. So that I don't know what your question was now.
It's okay. It's okay. So you're in church. You're feeling all these emotions, and when you feel like you're in your darkness
Mhm.
and anxiety is trying to come on you,
Yeah.
you at the same time are feeling God calling you.
Yes.
God calling you into not only a deeper relationship with Him, but that you're supposed to help others with what
Yes.
you've been through. This is
Yes.
something I talk about a lot on my live streams and in my coaching. You know, what we go through isn't just for us, it's for those that once we get through it with a deeper understanding, that we can help others get through their mess. So, people who come to my channel, I teach on getting over obstacles and how to find success and how to overcome confidence and worthiness issues and all of that, because all of that is standing in the way of your dreams and what God has
Mhm.
called you to do. So Christina is just proof, and so am I, and every single one of you, that you don't have to be perfect to be called to a bigger purpose. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to have all of the answers. You've been through something, and when you've been able to find a little bit of reprieve from it, a little bit of finding hope, a little bit of finding the answers, you can step out and help others who maybe have just gone through it, because you're a couple steps ahead. You don't have to be at the mountaintop. You could
Right.
just be part way up, and the people that are a few steps below you, you're helping them up to where you're at. And as you help them up, then you are growing and you're taking people with you. So those of you who are listening, who you know God has been calling you to do something, step up, no matter how scared you are, no matter
Yes.
how many excuses are, because yes, there's gaps. There's going to be gaps from where you are to where you need to be, but Jesus is that bridge that you will walk over to get there. You're not by yourself. You're not taking that leap to the other side, feeling like you're going to fall down into the valley and die, because Jesus will help you get over to the other side and have you bring the most amount of life and hope. We can't do it on our own, and
Mhm.
we don't have the answers, and we shouldn't have the answers. That's what we have God for. And if we can lead others to His healing, His hope, His salvation, all of it is, we're just being that role model, and people are going to be attracted to you because of what you've been through. They're going to
Yeah.
be attracted to you because they feel like, oh, this person understands. This person also had this childhood trauma. This person also dealt with this type of loss. This person also, and they're going to be attracted to you. And we have to be ready to give the answers of hope for what lies within us. So, speaking of hope, Christina, why don't you share with us? You have a wonderful section in your book about your hope process, the hope formula that you have discovered that helps get us from this place of pain and loss into, like, where can I find hope? How can I find hope? What are the steps that I need to take when we're in this vulnerable, raw place? Can you share your hope philosophy with us?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the book is actually called The Positive Widow, but then the subtitle is The Four Simple Ways to Hope and Healing After Loss. I was actually questioned by a couple of people about, why would you say the four simple ways? There's nothing simple about grief. And I'm like, I understand. And that's what I want to show you, is that you can take little baby steps, simple little practical steps that you can take, that and you practice these steps and you implement them and you believe in these steps that you're taking. That's how you're going to grow with your grief and be able to move forward. So it's not that I'm saying that grief is simple. Oh no, grief is not simple. And if you read my book, I am so raw in this book. I share, Katherine, you've read it, you've seen it. I get very authentic in this book and share the darkness, because I want you to see that you're not alone. You're not alone with these fears and the anxieties and the worries and the financial burdens. I also share I share a financial reference guide for widows, because here I was from corporate America, 25 plus years, had my own mortgage company, had 14 employees, and I still made very costly mistakes because of widow's fog. And widow's fog My grief counselor never told me about widow's fog. None of my doctors, my primary care, nobody at the ER ever told me what widow's fog was. So I go very in depth about widow's fog in my book, but the whole book is centered around hope. So it starts with healing your heart. And part of that chapter on healing your heart is the panic attacks and the strategies that you can do to help you through that, and all the self-care that you have to do. I didn't know what self-care was, by the way, Katherine. Again, I came from the Midwest, from Chicago, where we were told anything like that is a weakness. Work hard. I was always a caregiver. I took care of my husband. I took care of my father for almost 2 years. Then I started to be my daughter's sole provider. So practice self-care. What? No. I thought that was a very selfish thing. I didn't realize how important self-care is for your grief journey, for your healing journey. And when I rewrote the book, I added one of my tips, one of my strategies for self-care is the power of prayer. I didn't have that originally in there. So then when I rewrote the book, that is one of my practices. Gratitude prayers are so important. But in the healing in your heart section, it's about how you have to nourish your body too. Because when you experience loss of any kind, I would imagine at first you're so in denial and disbelief, and you're just numb because your brain is protecting your body. So it keeps you numb from feeling that loss. So I lost my appetite for 90 days or so. I don't remember eating. I don't even remember the first 90 days. And I dropped so much weight. Then all of a sudden, I started to grief eat. I call it griefy eating in my book, which is emotional eating. People will then learn to find coping skills, coping mechanisms. So I share tips on how to get through that, so you feel your emotions and not eat your emotions, eat your way through your emotions instead. And then I talk about how important walking is, and how connected you can feel to God and to your loved one. I always say my husband in there. All of that is so important on nourishing your body, not just with the nutrition, but with your thoughts, because what you say, you hear that. So if you're saying negative things all the time to yourself, you start to believe it because you're hearing that every day. And then, yeah, that's powerful. I didn't realize how much I was talking negatively to myself. Like, oh, you're not going to be like her. I was comparing myself to another widow. Oh my goodness, look at her. She's already remarried. She already has new babies. And you're still stuck in bed and living with the curtains shut. And you're hiding under your comforter and you're still crying. So it's so important to understand that what you're saying to yourself in that mirror, when you look in that mirror, is what you start to believe. So I teach little strategies on even just like high-fiving yourself, or just looking in the mirror and find 3 things that you like about yourself. Maybe it's your smile. Maybe you like your hair today. Maybe it's that you don't have any wrinkles, or, for your age. I mean, there could be some silly things. You never know, but there's always 3 things that you can find when you look in the mirror, and focus on that and understand that you are worthy. You are worthy. And then in the open your heart, so O for hope stands for open your heart. And in open your heart, that was the hardest chapter for me. I did not think that was going to be the hardest chapter. Do you want to know why? Because the first part of open your heart is vulnerability. I rewrote that one 3 times before, again, and then once I gave it to God, and then in those 8 days, wow, it's a totally different chapter from what it was originally. And it's about asking for help. And I share really good exercises and lists that you have to make, and you keep making them. And then all of a sudden you have a really good list of how and who to ask for help from, because you tell yourself these stories that nobody's there for you. But is that true? Is really nobody there for you? So I put you through some exercises, but I share my story of vulnerability first. And it was not easy to write that chapter because, I came from a world of finance. I had very high influential clients. And now here I'm writing a book about hope and healing. Like, who am I to write this at first? You start having those limiting doubts, so you sabotage yourself. So then in the
Yeah.
Open Your Hearts chapter, it's also about finding the right community, finding the right sisterhood. I immediately put my hands on my heart because I love my sisterhood. I love my group, the Positive Widow. I love my new little cozy group, the Positive Widow Grief Relief Group Coaching Program. We are just sharing such intimate things with each other. It's so cozy. We don't judge each other. We show each other kindness, love, and compassion. And I write about how it's so important that you find the right community, because that's where your grief will be witnessed. That's where you're going to receive support that you may not be receiving from family and friends because they don't understand you. And then I talk about gratitude because I struggled with gratitude after losing my husband. I did not understand how can grief and gratitude coexist? That doesn't even make sense. I was so angry at the world. And then P is protect your heart. This is a really good chapter. This one, I have several grief guides that I email if you contact me and let me know you bought my book. Oh my goodness, it's the number one thing in there is surviving. How do you survive and navigate the holidays after loss? So I share a lot of tips, and I do a lot of Zoom meetings I did in December on how to get through the holidays after loss. And then I have a grief guide for that. I also wrote a whole chapter about the financial hardship if you experience loss. For some of you, it may not be a husband, but maybe it was your parents. And maybe you're now going through a battle with your siblings because there wasn't a will left, and now because there's no will, you have to go through probate, and it can get messy. Grief can get very messy. And that chapter is very important for anyone that all of a sudden your finances, maybe like for me, my husband didn't have life insurance. So that was a big loss for us financially to go through. And I share all the things that you should be doing. Like number one, Katherine, for any of your listeners, you may not realize that there is a website you can go online to about unclaimed assets. I didn't know that. So it was like a year later, somebody told me about that. And I'm like, what do you mean? And sure enough, I went to Florida because I live in Florida, unclaimed assets. Anybody, you could even do that today, Katherine. There may be checks in your name from like 5 years ago. So there were checks that were sent to my husband, and it never got claimed. And it might have been me in my grief journey where I was deep in widow's fog. I didn't even know. And I was just not paying attention to the mail. So I was able to it's a process. You have to send a lot of paperwork, but it was worth it because some of those checks were like $300. One was a refund for a cell phone or something, so these are the tips that I share that could be relatable to any of your listeners. They just even about themselves, type your own name in unclaimed assets. But in the Protect Your Heart, I also talk about how hard it is to go into a new year, because as you're moving into a new year, you feel like you're now moving further away from your loved one of when the day occurred. So that's a really deep topic too. And then the last chapter is my favorite. It's Encourage Your Heart. So that's the last letter of hope. And that's all about finding meaning and purpose after loss. And I share a soul map in there called Hopeful Mornings and Peaceful Evenings. Simple little practical tools that you can do every morning when you wake up. Something as simple as track how much water you're drinking. Again, people don't realize dehydration exasperates grief. It just brings on more symptoms of your grief and anxiety. So just little practical tips like that. And it's all driven by the word hopeful and then peaceful. Again, it's about self-care. It's about journaling. It's about sleep. Oh my gosh, Katherine, I'm sure all of your listeners can relate if they've experienced loss. Sleep deprivation is the number one silent killer, according to one of my ER doctors. That's what he told me. So I shared tips on how to find better sleep habits and routines. So it's all centered around the word hope.
I love that. Your hope philosophy. So what last words of encouragement would you want to give people who are maybe dealing with loss, or maybe they're stuck in a certain type of loss and they don't know how to move forward? What advice would you give them?
Number one, find a community that you connect with. Connection is such a big part of your healing journey, and there's so much science behind it and research. You think you're going to have the best support from family and friends, and it's just not always going to be the case. A lot of times you feel judged. So my number one suggestion is find the right support system. If you are going through counseling and you're not comfortable with your first counselor, it's okay to shop counselors. So many people don't realize that they'll post inside of my group and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't like my grief therapist." And you can look for another grief therapist. And also
Yeah.
try to find somebody that has commonalities with you if you're looking at grief experts. I'm a certified grief coach, and the reason why I was so passionate and wanting to do this, because I could not find a grief coach that understood loss. They came from a textbook of grief. They got their master's degree, their doctorate degree. They understood the textbook version of grief, but they didn't understand firsthand what it was like
Yeah.
losing my husband, losing my parents, losing my brother. So they went in a different direction with me, and I'm like, no, I want to know, how do I take the first steps to move forward? So that's why
Yeah.
I decided to become a grief coach. So definitely start practicing self-care, and it could be little things that you do for yourself, even just like a little facial at night. You'll feel so much better for doing little things for yourself. But number one is
Mm-hmm.
finding the right community and the right support system.
Yeah. And so if people want to find out more about you or work with you further or get your book, what do you want to, how can they do that?
So I have a website, thepositivewidow.com, and I also have my private group. It's called The Positive Widow on Facebook. I'm on Instagram as Christina Napoleon. They could also send me an email, especially if they buy my book. My book is on Amazon, by the way, and or probably still is, a number one bestseller. I also have an adult coloring book, which helps with anxiety, which helps with stress. I have a reflections journal on Amazon. So there's 3 different books that you can buy on Amazon. Just search my name, Christina Napoleon, or if you search the Positive Widow books, all 3 will pop up. And you can also email me at thepositivewidow@outlook.com. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. I think this was valuable for our listeners, and I'm so excited to see how you're growing in this journey and the amount of people you've been able to help. It's really amazing, and it's an amazing testament for everyone watching to step into your journey, to step into your calling that God is calling you to do right now, even if you don't feel ready, because God's going to lead you. And you could be going in circles, banging your head against the wall for a year trying to do something. But when you invite God, 8 days, and you're like there.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So just like Christina, invite God into all the things you're doing, and expect great success. All right. Thank you for being here, Christina. And we will see everyone next week.